You know, they say you never really know who's standing behind you in the checkout line, or who's pouring your water at a fancy restaurant, and honestly, most people don't care to look. They just see the uniform, the name tag, and they look right through the human being wearing it like they're made of glass. That was my life for 3 years, just a ghost with a mop bucket and a 1,000-yard stare, trying to scrub away memories that refused to fade, trying to be invisible in a city that thrived on noise and neon. My name is Elias Thorne, at least. That's what it says on my driver's license now, and back then, I was the head custodian at the Gilded Cage, one of those ultra-exclusive supper clubs in Chicago where a steak costs more than my monthly rent, and the air smells like old money and expensive perfume. It was the perfect place to hide, or so I thought, because nobody looks at the janitor. Nobody wonders about the scar running down his forearm or why he walks with a gait. That's just a little too silent for a big man until the night the glass shattered and the world tilted on its axis. It was a Tuesday, typically a slow night, but Julian Vane was in the house, and when Julian Vane is in the room, the gravity shifts. You've probably seen Vane on the covers of tech magazines, the guy who invented half the software running your smartphone, a billionaire with a god complex and a paranoia streak a mile wide, always surrounded by a phalanx of security guards who looked like they were carved out of granite but moved with the stiffness of guys who pumped iron, but never actually took a punch. I was over in the corner, polishing the brass railing near the kitchen service entrance, just blending into the woodwork, watching the room through the reflection in the metal, a habit I picked up in a life I left buried in the sand dunes of the Middle East. Vane was at the center table, laughing aloud, clinking crystal glasses with a couple of nervous-looking investors from grim-faced European conglomerates, and sitting next to him, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else on the planet, was Elena. Elena was Vane's right hand, his fixer, the woman who kept his empire from crumbling under the weight of his ego. She was sharp, terrifyingly efficient, and beautiful in that severe, don't mess with me kind of way, wearing a charcoal suit that fit like armor. I'd seen her before. She was the only one who ever looked me in the eye when I held the door open, usually just a nod, a brief acknowledgement of shared humanity in a room full of sharks. But that night, I saw her scanning the exits, her fingers tapping a rhythm on the tablecloth, her instinct screaming that something was off. And she was right. It happened fast, but when you've spent a decade in special operations, fast slows down, frame by frame, like a movie reel getting jammed in the projector. 3 men entered through the front, not the kitchen, which was bold, dressed in suits that didn't quite hide the bulk of Kevlar vests underneath, moving with a synchronized predatory rhythm that screamed professional hit squad, not just some random stick-up crew. Vane's security detail, the granite statues, they were slow, reacting to the visual instead of the vibe, and by the time the first guy reached for his holster, the lead attacker had already closed the distance. A bottle of vintage wine exploded against the wall, screams erupted like a siren, and chaos took the wheel. I saw the lead attacker, a guy with dead eyes and a neck tattoo of a scorpion, pistol whip the head of security, dropping him like a sack of cement, while the other 2 fanned out to cut off the escape routes, boxing Vane in. Vane looked like a deer in headlights, his arrogance evaporating instantly into pure, primal terror. He scrambled back, knocking his chair over, spilling that expensive scotch all over his Italian loafers, while Elena, bless her, brave soul, tried to shove him behind her, putting her own body between a billionaire and a bullet. That was the moment the switch flipped for me, that dark, cold circuit breaker in the back of my skull that I hadn't touched since I hung up the uniform and walked away from the teams. I didn't think, I didn't calculate the pension I'd lose or the anonymity I'd sacrifice. I just moved. I had a heavy metal serving tray in my hand, one of those industrial silver platters, and as the scorpion-tattooed guy raised his weapon toward Vane, I launched it like a frisbee, the heavy edge catching him right in the throat, crushing his windpipe and sending him staggering back, gagging, his aim ruined. I vaulted the brass railing, clearing 6 feet of polished mahogany in a single fluid motion, landing softly between Vane and the second gunman. The guy swung his weapon toward me, eyes widening, because he hadn't factored the janitor into his tactical assessment, and that split second of confusion was all I needed. I stepped inside his guard, trapping the gun arm, driving my elbow into his temple with a sickening crunch. That vibrated all the way up my shoulder. Lights out, instant reset. The third guy, the anchor, he was good. He saw his team drop and adjusted instantly, pulling a serrated combat knife when his gun jammed, lunging for Elena because he knew she was the soft target, the leverage he needed. I didn't have a weapon, just my hands and the rage of a man who just wanted to go home to his daughter. So I grabbed a linen napkin from a falling table. Sounds ridiculous, I know, like something out of a bad spy movie, but I whipped it around his knife hand, twisting the wrist until the bone snapped, and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the marble floor hard, and before he could scramble up, I put a boot on his chest and applied just enough pressure to let him know that breathing was now a privilege, not a right. The whole thing took maybe 12 seconds. Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket, broken only by the whimpering of the guy with the crushed throat and the distant wail of approaching sirens. I looked up, chest heaving slightly, and locked eyes with Vane, who was trembling on the floor, looking at me like I was an alien creature that had just burst out of a mop bucket. Then I looked at Elena, and her expression was different. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. She was looking at the way I stood, the way I checked the room for secondary threats, the way I was already planning my exit. I didn't wait for the applause. I didn't want the police report. I just turned and walked out the kitchen door, grabbing my coat, trying to disappear into the Chicago night before the flashing lights boxed me in. But you can't outrun the internet. Someone had filmed it. Of course they did, holding their phone under a table. And by the time I got back to my tiny apartment in the outskirts, the video of the janitor wick was trending worldwide. That my apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet I protected with my life, because inside, sleeping in the room with the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, was Lily. Lily is 10. She's deaf, and she's the only reason I'm still on this side of the dirt. I checked on her, watching the gentle. 2 days later, they found me, not the bad guys, but Elena. I was at the park with Lily, watching her sign with her friends, when a sleek black sedan pulled up and Elena stepped out, wearing jeans and a leather jacket, looking less like a corporate shark and more like a woman on a mission. She didn't come with guards, which I respected. She walked right up to the bench where I was whittling a piece of wood and nervous habitant sat down, leaving a respectable distance. Elias Thorne, she said, not a question, a statement. Marine, Raider, Silver Star, fell off the grid 4 years ago after an ambush in Syria that went sideways. They say you died, or at least, the part of you that followed orders did. I didn't look up from the wood. You did your homework, or Vane did. Vane is a mess, she said, her voice tired. He hasn't slept. He's firing everyone, seeing shadows. In every corner. He wants to hire you, Elias. Name your price. Double whatever you think is fair. A house in the hills. Private schools for the girl. He knows about Lily, by the way. That made me stop. I looked at her then, the knife still in my hand. If he knows about Lily, then he knows why I can't be his shield. I don't do that work anymore. It brings demons, and I don't want demons around my daughter. It's not just a job offering, Elena said, her voice softening, losing that corporate edge. It's a plea. Those men at the restaurant, they weren't random. They work for a man named Victor Kale, a ghost from Julian's past, a partner he cut out of a deal 10 years ago. Kale isn't going to stop. He sent a message this morning. A photo of Julian's house, a photo of my apartment, and a photo of the school where your daughter goes. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. He threatened my kid. He's thorough, Elena whispered. He knows you intervened. In his eyes, you picked a side. You're a player in the game now, Elias, whether you want to be or not. You can run, drag Lily halfway across the country, sleep with one eye open in cheap motels, or you can help us end this. Julian has the resources, but he doesn't have the teeth. You're the teeth. I looked over at Lily, laughing silently as she went down the slide, innocent, pure, untouched by the stain of the world I came from. If Kale knew about her, she was already a target. Running wasn't an option. Not with a predator like that. I had to turn and fight, but I wasn't going to do it as Vane's employee. I was going to do it as the guy who decides when the game is over. I don't want his money, I said, standing up, brushing the wood shavings off my pants. And I don't follow his orders. If I do this, we do it my way. We go dark. We get off the grid. We use his money to set the stage, but I write the script, and once Cale is down, I disappear. And Vane forgets my name. Deal? Elena stood up, meeting my gaze, and for the first time, I saw the fear she was hiding behind that stoic mask, and the gratitude. Deal, she said. We moved fast. I pulled Lily out of school, telling her it was a surprise vacation, a camping trip like we used to talk about. We drove north, way north, to a decommissioned lumber mill Vane owned near the Canadian border, a place surrounded by miles of dense forest and icy water. It was a fortress of solitude, rough, industrial, and defensible. Vane arrived by helicopter, looking pale and shaking, clutching a briefcase like a lifeline, whining about the lack of Wi-Fi and the smell of pine and damp earth. This is it, Vane sneered, looking around the dusty main floor of the mill. I'm paying you millions to hide me in a barn. You're not paying me anything, I reminded him, my voice flat. And this isn't a barn, it's a kill box. You're the bait, Vane. Cale wants you. He'll track the flight plan. He'll find the heat signature. He's coming here, and when he does, we'll be ready. The days leading up to the attack were strange. We fell into a rhythm. Elena wasn't just a suit. She knew how to handle herself. She'd grown up rough in Detroit before she polished herself into a diamond, and she helped me fortify the place, setting tripwires, reinforcing doors, creating sightlines. We talked late at night while Vane popped sleeping pills and passed out in the secure room. She told me about the pressure of being the only adult in the room for a man-child billionaire, the loneliness of a life spent in first-class lounges, but coming home to an empty apartment. I told her about Lily's mom, how I lost her to a drunk driver, not a war, how the silence in my house used to terrify me until I learned to listen to it. There was a moment, tonight's in, when we were sitting on the roof watching the tree line. You're good with her, Elena said, nodding toward the window where Lily was drawing in her sketchbook. You speak her language without saying a word. She hears more than people think, I said. She sees the truth. People use words to lie, but the body can't help but be honest. And what is your body saying right now? She asked, turning to me, the moonlight catching the sharp angle of her jaw. Bet I'm tired of fighting, I admitted, looking at her, really, looking at her. But I'm willing to go one more round if it keeps the wolves away from the door. She reached out, her hand brushing mine, rough skin against smooth, and there was a spark there, hot and undeniable, but we didn't act on it. The air was too charged with the impending violence, the calm before the storm. Then, the storm broke. It was 3 a.m. on a moonless night when the perimeter alarms tripped silent vibrations on the wristband I wore. No sirens, just a pulse against my skin. I woke Elena with a touch on the shoulder. She was up instantly. Gun in hand, I'd taught her how to hold it properly. They're here, I whispered. Stay with Vane. Don't open the safe room door unless you hear my voice, and I mean my voice. If they breach, you know what to do. I know, she said, her voice steady. Though her hands trembled slightly, she looked at me, eyes wide. Come back. Elias, don't be a hero, just be a survivor. I'm just the janitor. I gave her a grim smile. I'm just here to clean up the mess. I slipped into the darkness of the mill, merging with the shadows, the familiar weight of a tactical shotgun in my hands, feeling the old instincts taking over. The cold calculation of distance and angle. Cale hadn't sent 3 guys this time. The thermal scanners picked up 12 heat signatures moving through the trees. A full paramilitary squad with night vision and suppressed rifles. They were moving to flank, confident, expecting a scared billionaire and a couple of rent-a-cops. They had no idea they were walking into a haunted house, and I was the ghost. I waited until the point man breached the main loading bay doors. He stepped onto the concrete, scanning with his laser sight. I was perched 20 feet up on the catwalk, perfectly still. I didn't shoot. I dropped a heavy chain hoist I'd rigged earlier. It swung down with the force of a wrecking ball. smashing into the guy and sending him flying back out the door. Chaos erupting instantly. Contact front. Someone screamed over the comms I'd tapped into, "Welcome to the party." I muttered, racking. The slide of the shotgun. The echo slammed around the metal walls like thunder. The hunt was on. The thing about fighting in the dark isn't about who has the better night vision goggles. It's about who knows the terrain, who knows where the floorboards creak and where the steel beams cast the deepest shadows. I knew. This old mill down to the rivets. As Kel's men poured in, sweeping their lasers through the dust-choked air, I moved above them on the catwalks like a spider in its own web. They were disciplined. I'll give them that, moving in tight formations, checking corners, but they were looking for a fight on a horizontal plane, and I was fighting vertical. I took out the second guy with a flash bang I'd rigged to a tripwire near the generator. The explosion was blinding in the enclosed space, deafening white noise that scrambled their comms. While they were reeling, rubbing spots from their eyes, I dropped from the rafters, landing silently behind a pair of mercenaries. I didn't use the gun to loud, gives away position. I used a baton, extending it with a snap, to swift strikes, to the backs of their knees, bone against steel, and as they buckled, I finished it with efficient, brutal strikes to the base of the skull. They dropped without a sound. Target is hostile. One man. He's moving fast. Kel's voice crackled over the radio. I'd pulled off one of the downed men. He sounded angry, but composed. "Burn it down if you have to. Flush him out." Smoke grenades started skittering across the floor, filling the mill with thick, acrid gray fog. They were trying to blind me, forcing me to the ground where they had the numbers. Smart. But I had prepared for this. I pulled on a gas mask, the rubber seal tight against my skin, and activated the sprinkler system I'd rewired. But it wasn't water that rained down. It was a mixture of water and fire-retardant foam. Slick and heavy, the floor instantly became an ice rink. I watched them slip, slide, lose their footing, their tactical precision turning into a slapstick comedy of errors, but deadly. I moved through the chaos, a shadow in the mist, a shotgun blast here, taking out a knee, a grapple there, using the momentum of a charging attacker to throw him into a pile of rusted machinery. It was brutal work, inanimate and ugly. I wasn't thinking about honor or glory. I was thinking about Lily sleeping in the bunker below, about Elena holding a pistol with shaking hands. Every man I dropped was one less threat to them. Finally, only Cale was left. The other 10 were groaning on the floor or zip-tied to pillars I didn't kill unless I had to. A remnant of a conscience I was trying to keep alive. Cale was waiting in the center of the mill, standing in a pool of light from a single hanging bulb that hadn't been shot out. He held a high-caliber pistol, looking calm, almost bored. He was a big man, scarred, wearing a bespoke suit that was now ruined by dust and oil. "Thorn," he called out, his voice echoing. "Come on out. The game's getting stale. You've taken my pawns, congratulations. But the king is still on the board." I stepped out from behind a stack of lumber, leveling my shotgun at his chest. "Game over, Cale." "Drop it." Cale laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "You think this ends with me?" Vane destroyed lives, Elias. He ruined my company, drove my partner to suicide, erased my pension fund to pad his quarterly earnings. I'm not the villain here. I'm the karma. You're defending a monster. I'm not defending him," I said, walking closer, keeping the barrel steady. "I'm defending the people he drags down with him. Put the gun down, Cale. Don't make me do this in front of the kid." He paused, looking confused. Kid. He didn't know about Lily being here. That was my edge. But in that second of hesitation, the safe room door blasted open. It wasn't Elena coming out, it was Vane. The idiot had cracked. The pressure, the noise, the fear, it broke him. He stumbled out, screaming, waving a gold-plated revolver he'd probably never fired in his life. "Get away from me, I'll kill you all," Vane shrieked, totally unhinged. Kel's eyes lit up. He shifted his aim from me to Vane in a heartbeat. "Hello, Julian." "No," I shouted, sprinting forward. Cale fired. I dove, not at Cale, but at Vane, tackling the billionaire as the bullet sliced through the air. Where his head had been a microsecond before, we hit the wet concrete hard. Sliding into a heap, Cale adjusted his aim, ready for the execution shot, standing over us with a sneer. Pathetic. Cale spat, "Goodbye, partner." The crack of a gunshot rang out, sharp and singular. But it didn't come from Kel's gun. Cale stiffened, a look of profound surprise crossing his face. He dropped his weapon, clutching his shoulder, spinning around. Elena stood in the doorway of the safe room, smoke curling from the barrel of the 9mm I'd given her. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face, but her stance was perfect. Feet planted, grip solid. She'd taken the shot. I was up in a flash, kicking Kel's gun away and sweeping his legs, pinning him to the ground. He groaned, bleeding, defeated not by the super soldier, but by the assistant he'd ignored. "It's over," I growled into his ear, tightening the zip tie around his wrists. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Vane's sobbing. I stood up and looked at Elena. She lowered the gun, her knees buckling, and I caught her before she hit the floor. She buried her face in my chest, sobbing, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. I held her, stroking her hair, whispering that it was okay, that she did what she had to do. Lily came out then, running to me, ignoring the blood and the mess, just seeing her dad. I scooped her up, holding both of my girls. Yeah, I thought of them as my girls now while the police sirens finally began to wail in the distance. The aftermath was a blur of lawyers, police statements, and NDA letters. Vane, to his credit, or maybe just out of sheer terror of bad PR, spun the story as a failed robbery. Cale went away for a long time, his connections crumbling once he was in custody. Vane tried to give me a check, a blank one. He sat in my living room a week later, looking smaller, less like a titan of industry, and more like a lonely man who realized his money couldn't stop a bullet. "Fill it out," Vane said, pushing the check across the coffee table. "Anything you want. A house, a boat, an island. You saved my life. You saved everything." I looked at the check, then at Elena, who was in the kitchen helping Lily bake cookies, flour everywhere, both of them laughing, communicating in a mix of clumsy sign language and smiles. "I don't want your money, Julian," I said, sliding the check back. "But I'll take a favor. Name it." He said immediately, "The Obsidian." "The club," I said. "You own the building. Sell it to me, at a price a janitor can afford." He blinked. "You want to run a jazz club?" "I want to build something," I said, looking back at the kitchen. "I'm done cleaning up other people's messes. I want to make a place where people can just be." 6 months later, the Obsidian reopened. It wasn't exclusive anymore. No VIP lists, no $500 steaks. It was a place for good music, good food, and safety. I ran the security, obviously, but mostly I managed the floor. Elena quit Vane's empire the day after the shooting. She manages the books and the staff, and she's terrifyingly good at it. Vane still comes in every Tuesday, sits at the bar, drinks a cheaper whiskey, and actually talks to the staff. He's learning, slowly, and me, I'm not invisible anymore. I walk the floor, shaking hands, checking the exits out of habit, but mostly watching Elena and Lily in the corner booth.